Commons down the middle. We join the line. Forward, girl. Forward again.
So you asked me, what is a commons? I actually tried to introduce this word to my kids. My son, who at the time was about 9, I wanted to see if he knew what a commons was. He said, the commons are things that everybody uses, like the sun or water or air. They are things that could be hurt or taken away or polluted. They could also be improved or protected. The internet, community parks, playgrounds, roads, plants, language, and the alphabet are some of the commons.
All of these things that we've always just taken for granted as being open and free and self-generated and community-generated are now, the ownership of them is being claimed.
For a number of years, I had been homeschooling my 3 kids, and in 2006, they started into a community service project on Tomales Bay. A friend of ours had asked if we would come and help with Tomales Bay cleanup, which they were doing yearly. Rufus and the kids went to this first cleanup, and this turned into an educational project, and they proceeded to go clean up the bay like 30 or 40 times. Part of what it elicits to do that kind of a service learning is a sense of belonging. By caring for it, you get a sense of belonging.
Of course, this area was inhabited by Coast Miwok Indians for many years. It was part of Spain, it was part of Mexico, and it was during that Mexican period where things started to get divided up into the ranches that we see today. There are a lot of ex-hippies here and a large Latino population. Now we depend quite a bit on tourist dollars, but the agriculture, especially the dairying, is still quite strong.
Even the name commons, the word commons, I wasn't familiar with until I started reading Jonathan Rowe's writings.
Jonathan Rowe was a writer and a political and economic thinker who wrote about all sorts of things, but the one theme that ran through it all really was a belief in something he eventually, although not originally, called the commons.
What we refer to as the commons today started as land. Today, when we talk about the commons, we aren't just talking about the land. The land is a metaphor. It is one of the many absurdities and myopias of the prevailing economic model that it takes no cognizance of the commons at all and of the many functions it provides. In the prevailing model, the air does not exist, our communities do not exist, the water in our lakes and streams do not exist. The reason they don't exist is because they are not transacted through money.
I came to Point Reyes because of the beauty and the nature. Jonathan came here because of the community.
No matter how much we desire to be close to our neighbors, if we don't have physical settings in which that desire can take root and be expressed, it's probably not going to happen.
In the very center of town, almost, is a little corner piece of land. The one thing that Jonathan had done before I started talking with him is he put a bench in the lot as a kind of experiment to see how it was used.
we don't have a local government here. When we do something, we do it ourselves. So if we have an empty lot, we just put a few tree rounds out there and you just see what happens. What if we had a little park in town, a sort of a plaza or zocalo like they have in Mexican towns? What would it be like? Well, why don't we ask people who grew up with one?
Una, dos, tres. Otra vez. Ajá. He came to the Latino photography project to ask about the plan to do a zocalo in Point Reyes. A zocalo in our town, it's a place where people can gathering together. It was like after mass, we stay on the zocalo and start to walk around and see if there any guy who likes you. And just once they like you, they ask you for permission to walk around on the zocalo, and that's how I met my husband. I was just walking with my friends, just walking around the zocalo, and just he asked me that if he can accompany me, and I say no, just maybe next time. And the next time he asked me again, I said okay. And then yes, we from there and now we met and we be friends, and then boyfriend and girlfriend, and then we get married.
The United States is first in the world in having the least amount of community gathering places of all. Of all. This is one of the greatest gathering places in all the world. This is the Piazza del Campo in Siena, in the hills of Tuscany. So this great intersection was retained over time as a place of great sort of exchange and celebration. This tower acts like a great sundial that sweeps across the floor of the plaza to celebrate the changing of the seasons and the sweeping of time across the surface during the day. About the same size as an American neighborhood, almost 40 outdoor gathering places. Now consider that a typical American neighborhood of the same population doesn't even have one single neighborhood public square.
We were inspired by what Mark had shown us. There was a lot of enthusiasm and momentum, and from that, it seemed like something to harness and to work with. So we did. And by February of 2007, on a rainy day, we had organized an all-day workshop, which was a perambulation, a walkabout of Point Reyes Station.
We identified these 8 strategic properties that had the potential of becoming part of a larger commons. We spent 3 or 4 hours actually visiting these different sites and beginning to take notes and begin to actually, with these architects, draw what we imagine these sites might become.
There were, and there still are, a number of properties in Point Reyes Station that were subject to change. And a building that's been empty for decades was then, still is. Another building that used to be a big community building, the Green Barn, but had changed hands. The little lot in the center of town where Highway 1 comes in and turns was so centrally located. And we started to approach the owners of that lot to find out if they might be interested in selling it. Not that we were prepared to buy it, but we were prepared to see how it might be purchased by the community. Part of that was the possibility that somebody else would come along and do something we don't know what with it. We were trying to get ahead of the change. So for us, it wasn't that we were trying to control anything other than to get a sense of how change was coming to our shared place and You know, what kind of a say we would have in that process. That was one level that we were working on, and at the same time we were working on the level of barn dances and doing something small that could happen. That's why one of the reasons why we started the little garden that is now a native plant garden. It was sort of think small and do it and get people involved.
At first I didn't know what people were talking about when I first moved out here, but now I know and I say it all the time.
Over the hill means going over White's Hill to Fairfax, San Rafael, San Anselmo.
Nobody wants to go over the hill, but that's where you got to go to get things that you can't get here.
One day I was driving over the hill to a store in East Marin doing chores. My cell phone rang, and it was a friend of mine, and he said, "I know you're over the hill someplace, and I was wondering if you would go to this computer store and pick up something that I really need." So I said, "Well, sure, where is it?" And he gave me the name of the store, and that's where I was. That's where I was going. And so I picked the thing up, and I started driving home, and I thought, that was pretty cool because it saved him a couple of hours of driving, all the gas. A few days later, I put together a little email list. And I said, would you like to be part of a group? When anybody's going over the hill or needs something, they'll just tell everybody on the group. And I don't remember who named it, but we came up with Over the Hill Gang. There was no promotion for it, no real advertising. We didn't put up flyers. And it began to grow. Within a few years, it got up to 500 or 600 people. Originally with the car, that trip was such a waste just to go over for me to get one thing at a store, my chores, when I can do, you know, a lot of chores so that it makes it seem, you know, in a sense the car becomes commons property. And then people started wanting to share things. And that became very popular. That became West Marin Share. There would be a lot of sharing, 10, 15, 20 things a day. There was a case of somebody who had had an operation which involved some radioactivity and wanted a Geiger counter to see if he was radioactive and might hurt the children. It seemed to me totally impossible, but that got posted, and within an hour, there was somebody who had a Geiger counter and gave instruction on how to use it, and loaned it for a month.
My wife grew up in a third world country on a rice farm. She came to this country about 6, 7 years ago. And after we were married, we were sitting around after dinner. She was reading the newspaper, and she looked up at me and she said, "What is this word I keep seeing? Depression. What is that? What does that feel like?"
He described to me what depression meant, and then I kind of paused for a while and thought, wow, that's kind of a fancy word, and at the same time kind of deep. And we call it, you know, in our vocabulary, I call it, you know, loneliness, you know, simply loneliness.
Her question raises the possibility that what we have defined as biochemical dysfunction, at least in part, is really social dysfunction, but we never get to that question as long as the only remedies we are permitted to consider are those that a market can produce and not the ones also that a commons can produce.
So we were able to attain the lease on the lot in December 2010. There's a little tiny building on that lot.
We basically took all of the material out of this yellow structure. There were a lot of leftovers from a tie-dye shop that was here for a number of years. And now we'll start to look at next steps for the building.
building was ready and we were somewhat ready to invite this rotating use. And the first person who did was a woman who has her own soap making business. The youth center did a bake sale. They raised, hundreds of dollars for the youth center and also contributed a portion to the rent. But the first actual planned event that ever happened in the lot was a very sad event. In March of 2011, March 20th, our co-director, Jonathan Rowe, died. He passed away suddenly, and it was a huge blow to his family, his wife and his son, and also really to the whole community, because he was important to a lot of people in a lot of different ways, even beyond this project with the Commons. So the first event we had at the lot was a memorial celebration of Jonathan Rowe. It took place in part at Toby's feed barn, where he also spent regular hours, and then at the town commons, which he'd really envisioned. So you guys go ahead and unveil. We discussed with Mary Jean also, and Josh, his son, the idea of creating a bench in Jonathan's name to place at this town commons. He's been busy and he's still busy. Placing a bench there, well, that's what Jonathan started with.
You see the crabgrass in here? It's come up in the crack here.
What do you do at the stage we're in now with this process that's happened, that's been interesting, that's created certain spaces that we have responsibilities for, need maintenance?
We're trying to have it so the strawberry bed and the Uruguayan stays in its place. We're also trying to make it so people can see the rocks.
The longevity of a project needs to be reviewed, and that's what we're doing right now. Is this important? Is this important enough that the community should keep it going? How do we support the mission and sustain the projects of West Marin Commons, in particular the town commons? Funding is a big one. We pay rent. Rent and insurance is probably less than $5,000 a year.
It's about as simple as you can get. It's been a place where people walk on a natural path. There's a little tiny house there. There's some places to sit down, and there's some trees and bicycles parked. It's not very complicated.
And John has one approach, which is identify essentially a collective of stewards that are willing to support it. And another approach is to make a broad appeal, like a tithe. We want the community to make a tithe to the town commons.
The tricky part in our community about that is that not everyone thinks West Marin Commons is great, but yet the Commons has put itself in a position where it's highly visible given the lot, right? And I think there's going to be friction. We're working this out. We're inventing as we go.
Do people have to be on the calendar?
That's a good question. I was there a couple weeks ago, and there were sleeping bags hanging from the tree, and there was a barbecue, people barbecuing with a physical barbecue. So there is stuff that kind of bubbles up on that site that we don't control, but maybe we need to look at that. And
that's what Commons is.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it is, but also remember, it is a privately leased and insured space. So I think what we're talking about is two different things. It's not actually a commons. It's a privately owned thing.
We're sort of working on different levels. On one level, we want it to be friendly and open, and on the other level, we have responsibilities around it. So we find ourselves in an awkward position sometimes with that.
We feel that we've been too insular a set of folks, and that has been part of our capacity to have the time and the energy to make it broader out.
Sometimes it's discouraging because I don't see interest in
People really pitching in. People really are able to own the space as a commons the more they put into it. So if somebody's raking it, they're putting their energy and their love into that land, and that's an important missing element that almost needs to be opened up more so that more people can get in there and put some elbow grease into it.
And as West Marin Commons does that, as they open it up to the community at large, the community takes stewardship of the commons. The whole community becomes the steward.
This is a public art project called For the Birds. And we're doing 2 weekends of pop-ups in the town commons.
We're decorating Nicola's nest. We painted some ivy and some leaves and stuck them in, but now we are putting some grass in.
The hope is to raise awareness about this important fly zone for the bird populations living in and around the Point Reyes region, and also the migrating birds that come and land here for a period and then move on.
There is nothing more powerful than creating public spaces where spontaneous activities can occur, where visitors are as welcome as locals, where on any given day a wide range of cultural, artistic, and personal expressions can take place. I made a request, and the Board of Supervisors graciously accepted it, to fund a full 3 years of the annual lease cost for that property. And now it really is an opportunity for this community to step up and decide what the future of the Commons will be.
Was it George Orwell who said that the hardest story to see is the one that's right in front of you? And wealth is the same way, that the hardest wealth to see is the wealth that is right in front of us and all around us. It's all right there. It could be the air, it could be the water in the oceans, it could be the language that we all speak, it could be the childhood games that we played, our kids play and their kids will play, we hope. It is the commons. It is the realm that belongs, in some sense, to all of us. It belongs to all of us.